Of
Good to see you all again. So let us get started without any delay in our very exciting, almost tomorrow's the last day of this parak, and then we start Ben Sorah Moreh, which is, of course, a very famous parak. But before we get there, we're up to Daf Samach Zayin 67 in Masechet Sanhedrin. So we are continuing a discussion about all the people who get skila. And the next one in our list was a sort of composite group of people called Mesit and Mediach. So really the next two Mishnayot, which are split up in our Gemara, are really one Mishnah, as we're going to see in the Gemara. The Mesit is, I'll tell it out, but we'll see it in the Mishnah, a person who proselytizes, if that's a good word to use, or tries to convince people to do Avodah Zarah, which is really what it means, for an individual. And Mediach is a word we use when a person tries to convince an entire group or an entire city to serve Avodah Zarah. And if they listen and do it and they're an entire city, the punishment is different than if it's an individual. We've discussed this before, that an entire city, they get sayif, but their property is destroyed. And if it's an individual, they get skila, but their property is not destroyed. What about the person who convinces them? So that's the mesit or the mediach. So says our Mishnah, let's get started at the top of Daf Samach Zayin. Ha-mesit zeh hedyot. That's referring to an individual. We'll see in the Gemara, we think what that means is that only an individual who is mesit is chayev skila. But if a prophet, what Torah says about a prophet, right? Don't come and tell people not to worship Avodah Zarah, that a prophet who is mesit would not get skila, they would get something else. They get saif maybe, or chenek. And ha-mesit et hedyot, and this person who is convinces someone to do Avodah Zarah refers to convincing an individual. Hedyot here means individual, not a group, which would be a mediach. That's what we think. We'll see in the Gemara what that means. Amar, now let's say this person says to the subject, right? So the mesit comes and says to an individual, Yesh yirah b'makom ploni. You know, there's a god, a yirah, a feared thing, in another place. And kach ochelet, we had this before. This is how it eats. This is how it's nourished. Kach shota, the kach mitiva. This is how it does good, right? This is how it's generous with those who worship it. Kach miriyah, this is how it punishes those who don't worship it. Things like that. That is trying to convince people to worship Avodah Zarah. And it says our Mishnah, interesting detail. Kol chayvei mitot shebetorah. Anytime the Torah says that a person is chayv mita for what they do, like Shabbos or any of the znut we talked about, ein machminim aleiham. We don't entrap them. Machinim means you don't trick them, meaning entrap is a strong word, of course. We don't trick them into committing the crime. Chutz mizu, except for this one. For example, Amar l'shnayim, the guy goes over to two people and says, let's go worship this idol, or this idol is really enticing. Then those two people, hein edav, they are the witnesses. Remember, you don't need hatra'ah. You don't need to warn a person for mesit and mediach, unlike everything else. And mevi'inoto lebeitin. They could bring him to court, say, we heard him say this, v'soklinoto, and they would stone him. Now, Amr le'echad, now let's say he says it to one person. Now, one person can't be a valid witness, or can't be a combination. So what he can do is hu omer, he can say, yesh li chaverim rotzim bekach. I know other guys who'd be interested in hearing this kind of thing. And let's say, of course, the guy doing the hasata is not a fool, and he says, well, I'm not going to say it in public. Im haya arum, if he is smart, how we translate arum, and he says, I don't want to talk in front of them, that's where you trick him. Machminim lo edim achorei hageder. You would prepare and hide witnesses behind the fence or in the other room to hear what he was saying. V'hu omer lo, and he would then, the guy trying to entrap him would say, Amor ma shamarta b'yachud. Tell me what you said before. We're in private. No one else can hear us. V'halo omerlo, and the other one says it to him, let's go worship this idol. Hu omerlo, now he should at least try to stop him, and he should say, how can we leave our God in heaven and go worship stones and rocks, right? Im chozerbo, if the Mesid says, you're right, it's a mistake, we're not really should go and worship this, then Arezim Mutab, then he's off the hook, because he went back, he was trying to do something wrong, he gave up. But Im Amar, if he says, Kach hi chovotenu, this is what we have to do, Kach yafeh lanu, this is good for us, then they swoop in. Ha'omdin me'achorei hageder, the ones hiding behind the fence, come in and they say, we heard it, we saw it. Nevi'ino to lebeit din, and they bring him to court, v'soklinoto, and they would stone him. Now, what exactly does he have to say, right? Meaning, if he just says there's a nice idol there, that's not chayav. He has to say, ha'omer, we had this earlier, evod, let's go worship this idol, or elech ve'evod, nelech v'navod, let's go together. Let's go, I'll do it. Or esbach, the zvicha means slaughtering an animal. Or elech ve'ezbach, nelech v'nezbach, or aktir, let's bring ketoret. Let's remember, these were the four descriptions of zvicha, haktara, nisuch, and ashtachava that we said before, right? So aktir, elech v'aktir, nelech v'naktir, inaseach, elech v'naseich, nelech v'naseich, eshtachaveh. Let's bow down. Elech v'shtachaveh, nelech v'shtachaveh. These are all languages of hasata, of worship of the other idol, the idol. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Again, the Mishnah really doesn't end here because there's a few more words that would be very helpful, but our Gemara splits it up for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but our Gemara splits it up. Says the Gemara, Hamesit zehedyot, right? A person who goes to convince another person to worship Avodah Zarah, that's referring to a hedyot, meaning a regular human, what do we call them? A normal citizen, as opposed to a navi, right? Now, says the Gemara, what that implies is time of the hedyot. The implication is that, like I just said, it's because he or she is an individual. Ha-navi, but if a navi came down and said, I am a navi, I had nevuah from Hashem who said we should all go worship Baal, then the chenek. Then that implication is that navi would get chenek, not skila, not sreifa. Sorry, not skila, like our Mishnah. And the next words in the Mishnah are, ha-mesita hedyot, someone who proselytizes to a individual, is how I translate hedyot. Time of the yachid, harabim, if it was a whole city, then again, the person doing the hasata would get chenek, right? So that's what our Mishnah implies. Says the Gemara, matnita mani Rabbi Shimoni. Our Mishnah must be going like Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, in fact, there's a Braita where we have this debate. Says the Braita, we have the first word on a line, like, I don't know, 15 lines down. Navi shehidiach, biskila. A Navi who comes and tries to convince other people to do Avodah Zarah, that Navi gets skila like any individual, not like our Mishnah, as what we're understanding now. Rabbi Shimon says, no, bechenek, and that's how we're understanding our Mishnah. Continues the Braita, what if you're medichei ir nidachat, you try to convince not an individual, but a whole city, then you also get skila. Again, not like our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon omer bechenek. Okay, so that's how we're understanding our Mishnah. It's not like the Tanakama, who says you get skila even if you're a Navi and even if it's a whole city. You get chenek according to Rabbi Shimon. And that's what our Mishnah seems to imply. However, it doesn't make any sense because Ema Seifa. Look at the end of our Mishnah, and this is why I keep referring to the next Mishnah, which is the end of our Mishnah. Look at the next words. Now it's a quote from the following Mishnah, which we'll have in 10 lines. Ha-mediach, what is a person who's mediach? What is that category? Says the Mishnah, Zeh Omer, this is a person who says, let's go worship Avodah Zarah. Now that sounds a lot like the Mesit. So says Rav Yehuda Amarav, the difference is that that's referring to Medichei Irani Dachat Shanu. We're learning about someone who convinces a whole city to do it, right? But if the next Mishnah says that a Mediach is someone who convinces a whole city and you get Skila, that goes back like Atan the Rabbanan. That would be the Rabbanan. It doesn't make any sense for Reisha Rabbi Shimon to say for Rabbanan. So how do you understand our Mishnah? Says Ravina, you're right. Take back everything we said till now. Sorry. That Kula Rabbanani. In fact, the entire Mishnah, meaning the first part and the second part, which we're about to have, is the Rabbanan. And you're chayiv skila for being the mesit if you're an individual and if you're a navi and if the community is a solitary person or a whole city, right? And our Mishnah, which says a mesit of an individual, is not saying as opposed to a tzibor or as opposed to a navi. It's saying an individual and a tzibor, right? Meaning, lo zu af zu katani. Not only if you're mesit to one person, but even if you're mesit to all people. And it's not a chiddush, right? It's telling you both cases, that it's true about an individual and it's true about a tzibor. And of course, we could have just said a tzibor, and we could have just said one and I would have understood the other, but the Mishnah often does that. It's a technique. That's Ravina. Rav Papa says, the Mishnah is telling you something completely different. Ki katani mesit zeh hedyot. When our Mishnah said that a mesit is referring to an individual, what the Mishnah meant to tell you, right, is that basically the only time that this is sorry, Rashi explains, it means not that a Mesit who's a Hedyot as opposed to a Mesit who's a Navi. Basically, the Mishnah is saying every Mesit is treated like a fool or like a Hedyot, like a naive person, meaning that machminim alav, lahachmana, to tell you that you should try to entrap every Mesit, meaning no matter who they are, treat them like a Hedyot, even if it's a Navi, even if it's an educated person. Your goal is to try to get them to commit to what they're trying to do so that you can punish them. The Tanya, as we have in a Braita which elaborates on our Mishnah, Vishar kol chayvei mitot shebetorah ein machminim aleim. In all other punishments of Torah, we don't try to entrap the person. Chutz mizu, except for this case of a mesit and a mediach. Keitzad osin lo. What do you do? And the Mishnah, the Braita gets into an important case, which is that, as Rashi reminds us, you have to see the person doing the crime, right? So be careful. If you're hiding behind the fence and you can't see them, but you hear them saying what they're saying, that's not enough. You can't come to court and say, I recognize his voice. That's not sufficient. So let's say it's at night and you're not in the room. So you got to rely on the old light on the inside of the room trick, right? Turn on the lights in the inside house, meaning in the inner room, and you put witnesses outside the room, right, where they can see in, because remember, if there's a light inside and it's dark outside, you can't see out, but you can see in, right? The witnesses outside see the people on the inside, and they have to be able to hear it. I guess the window's open a little bit, or the walls were not so insulated. But the person inside doesn't know that there are witnesses there, because he's smart enough to say, I would never try to tell you the secrets in front of other people. I know I'll get killed. So he doesn't know anyone's listening. And the subject who's trying to entrap him now says to him, tell me what you were saying in private here. And he says his thing, I want to go worship this other idol. And the guy says, well, how can we do that? And just like in our Mishnah, if the guy says, you're right, I made a big mistake, mutav, that's good. But if he sticks to his position, he says, kachi chovatenu, this is our responsibility, kach yafelanu, then they swoop in, ha'edim sheshomim mibachutz, the witnesses who hear from outside, mevi'in oto lebeitin, v'soklin oto, and they would stone him in Beit Din. So that is the way we approach and punish a mesit. And as the Mishnah continues now, mediach, what is the Torah talks about mesit and mediach, that's a person who goes to a group. He doesn't go to an individual. He goes to a whole city and says, let's go worship Avodah Zarah. Now, the next case in our list is michashef, a person who is I don't really know how to translate kishuf, but say a sorcerer is how often people say, or a magician, doing magic, right? But creating things. You like the word sorcerer?
Yeah, sorcerer is fine.
Okay, sorcerer is great. But as we're going to see in the Gemara, the issue is someone who claims or potentially does create something new that doesn't exist before. That's what we call a sorcerer. Not telling the future, which we had before, not Ovyedoni, right, which is speaking in voices, but this is a mechashef, is a person who creates something magical, something new. So what does that mean? Says the Mishnah.
So what about the rest of the Gemara? Ben Sedata, Ben Pandirahu, Amar Rav Chisda.
Where are you?
You just skipped that section of the Gemara.
Oh yeah, sorry. So I don't have that. I apologize. Do you guys have that? Both of you have that? Yeah, there's a censored section that the regular Vilna Shas does not have that. Does everyone have that part that Ken was just referring to before the Mishnah?
I don't have it, no.
Yeah, so it's a great story. I totally forgot. It's censored. You'll see why it's censored in a second. Let me see if Safaria has it. Give me a second. Otherwise, you might have to read it to us, Ken. No, I got it in my. So I'm reading from Safaria now. Just trust me. This is a portion that is censored from the Vilna Shas that most Gemaras don't have, from the end of the Gemara before the Mishnah. So go back to before Mediach, and this is this is a quote now. V'chein asu leben sedata belud. This is what they did, meaning killing a person who tries to incite other people to worship Avodah Zarah is what they did to a person named Ben Sidata in the city of Lud. V'talu be'erev haPesach, and they hung him on the day before Pesach. This sounds a lot like Jesus, okay? Just for the record. And of course, it goes against big tradition, which is that we had nothing to do with his death, but That's why, anyways. So they hung him right before Pesach. Again, which goes against the Gemara, which says that you do skila. But either way, says the Gemara, what do you mean Ben Siddata? What do you mean his name was Ben Siddata? We thought his name was Ben Pandirahu. His name was Ben Pandira. Again, whoever this person is, if it's a reference to Jesus or some other sect or other thing, this Gemara says, we thought it was Ben Pandira. So says Rav Chisda, well, in fact, the name of that person was Baal Siddata, right? But meaning the mother's husband, so his father, who maybe was not really his father, but pretended to be his father, was named Sadata. So he's called Ben Sadata. But his mother was Pandira. He was Boel Pandira. The mother slept, sorry, not his mother's name was Pandira. The mother's person she slept with, who was his father, was named Pandira. Okay? So really, the true father was named Pandira. Says Gemara, what do you mean, Baal? That the person she slept with was Pandira. We thought that it was Papas ben Yehudahu, that the true husband was not the Baal, right? Not Boel, was not Sadat. You could say it was not Sadata. It was Papas ben Yehudahu. Ella says, you're right. Imo, his mother's name was Sadata. So we called this person Ben Sadata because his mother's name was Sadata. Says the Gemara now, this is where it gets very controversial. What do you mean, Imo? His mother was Sadata. His mother was Mary Magdalene, right? Says the Gemara, Miriam Migadla Nishayahavi. His mother's name was Miriam, the one who was Migadla Nishai. Now, Migadla Nishai means she braided people's hair, right? So according to this understanding, Magdalene was not because she came from a place, right? It's because her job was Migadel Seyar. She braided hair. She was a hairdresser. So his mother was Miriam Migadla Nishayahavi. Says the Gemara, right.
Migadel means to grow hair?
Migadla, so in this case, Gidul, remember Gidul Seyar, you can't do on Shabbat? Gidul means to braid. Migadel would mean that, but Migadla, the Gidul is braiding. Either way. So she was, it's all hard also for a person to make someone's hair grow. I guess they can make your hair grow. But anyways, it means in this context, braiding. Says the Gemara, well, it's Kedamri b'Pumpadita. It's really like they say in Pumpadita that Sadata is a nickname, because Sitat da Mibala. This woman, the Sadata means she was Sata, means she strayed from her husband. So she had a child illicitly. So she was married to someone. She had a child illicitly. Some versions say it was, no man, but we assume it means that she cheated on her husband and slept with someone else, became pregnant, had this child, and they called the child Ben Siddata. And according to this Gemara, he was a Mesit. He was someone who was convincing people to worship Avodah Zarah, and they hung him on Erev Pesach. Now, you could see why that might have been taken out of the Gemara by some censors. I can't say much more about it, but that is a Gemara that I don't have in front of me, but I just read to you from Sefaria. Very exciting. Anyways, let's go back to our Mishnah now. So, thank you, Ken. Says the Mishnah, HaMediach. What is a Mediach? So like I said, says to a community. What is a Michashef, a sorcerer? That is, it says the Mishnah, if you do an action to make your sorcery, to create a creature, let's say, then you're chayav. But if you just create something by sleight of hand, or I don't know how you say it, by aloha ochezet heinayim, not someone who just averts the eyes, meaning you distract them, but you don't actually make the dove that you showed up, right? The dove was there before, you just sort of revealed it, then that's of course not sorcery. Well, not of course. That's not sorcery and you don't get killed. Okay? That's the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva says, Mishum Rabbi Yeshua, well, there's many ways to do sorcery. You could have shnayim, you could have two people who are loktim kishuim, two people who gather kishuim, which we usually translate as like gourds or cucumbers, we say. I mean, in Hebrew, it's cucumbers, but I'm not sure if that's what it meant back then. But some kind of small, let's say cucumbers, okay? Two people can gather cucumbers using magic, right? Meaning they don't actually operate, but they cause them to be gathered. Echad lokate patur, one who does it is patur, v'echad lokate chayav. Why? Because if you do a real action to make it magic, collect all your cucumbers for you, then you're chayav. But if you're just playing a trick, they're already there and you revealed it, then you're patur. Then it's just a magic trick. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, as we quoted a few minutes ago, this Mishnah is referring to Medichi Eranidachat Shenukan. Here we're saying Hadacha means Eranidachat, a whole city. Okay, we quoted that before. Now let's get to the sorcerers. And I want to give an introduction, which is that I don't really understand anything we're about to read till the end of today's daf. So that's a disclaimer, I guess, more than an introduction. We're going to talk a lot about sorcery. It's really not clear to me what the Gemara means, what they believed, and what they thought. But as a very short introduction, I guess, there clearly were people or rabbis or opinions that thought that a sorcerer can, in fact, create something new. Okay? There's also an opinion that you can use a shade. A shade is, I don't know how we translate shade in English, but some kind of spirit that helps you create something new. So that's a lower level than Michashefa. Michashefa just makes it, they snap their fingers, they say whatever, they create the dove I'm going to use, right? But another way to do that is to rely on these shadim to do it for you, which also is a lower level of skill, okay? So says the Gemara now with that background. Tanu Rabbanan, Michashefa. Now, of course, this was today's parsha, right? Michashefa lo techaya in Parsha Mishpatim. That's an unusual thing because it says it in a female language, right? A woman sorcerer. It says the Braita, that doesn't mean that it's only a woman. Echad ha'isha, echad ha'isha. In matam lo Michashefa. So why did Torah say it in a female language? Mipnei sherov nashim mitziot b'kshafim. Because most women are, I don't know what mitzuyot means. I looked at some translations, didn't like them, but I would say it means that they are frequent. They're familiar with kshafim. Not that they do it, they know about it, they think about it.
They're involved.
Right. I'm not sure mitzuyot
Yeah.
means involved, but anyway, so it's something negative, but it says it, right? So it's more likely by women. Mitatam b'ma. Now, how do you kill a michashefa? Now, we just learned a Mishnah about that they get skila, so you already have a tip-off. But the Gemara is asking from the pasuk. The pasuk we read this morning says, michashefa lo tichaya, right? A sorcerer should not live, but it doesn't tell you how to kill them. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, well, I can tell you, Nemer ka michashefa lo tichaya. Says in the pasuk in Mishpatim, don't let him live. Nemer lahalan, it says the word lo tichayeh kol neshama when it's talking about the Jews going into Eretz Yisrael and encountering the Shiva Amimim and saying don't let them live. So it's the same word, lo tichayeh kol neshama. Now, how did the Jews kill the people in Israel when they came in? With a sword. They had a war, right? So ma lahalan b'sayif, afkan b'sayif. So it says Rabbi Yossi, not like our Mishnah, that a michashefa gets killed with sayif. Rabbi Akiva says, not true. Nemer kam michashefa lo techaya, but nemer lahalan, it says, another reference to a recent parsha, that you shouldn't go up to Har Sinai, right? You shouldn't go around Har Sinai, and if you do, yasakol yisakel, you'll get stoned. And then the pasuk adds, im behema im ish lo yichya. Whether you're a person or an animal, you won't live. So just like there, it was referring to skila, because it says sakol yisakol, ma lahalan b'skila, afgam b'skila. So Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Yossi and says the punishment for sorcery is skila. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, I don't understand. You have a pasuk in that says the word lo yichya. I say the pasuk by Michashefa says Michashefa lo tichaya in a female language. So my comparison is more apt. It says Rabbi Yossi, ani danti lo tichaya mi lo tichaya. So ata danta lo tichaya mi lo yichya. My comparison is better. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, well, it's true that your words are better, but your context makes no sense. Ani danti Yisrael mi Yisrael. I refer to Hashem talking to them at Har Sinai, which are Jews, right? To another case of a punishment by Jews. Sheriba bahema katuv mitot harbe. Remember, by our whole Masechta, arba mitot, right? There's 4 different types of death for a Jew. You compared it to non-Jews when they went into Eretz Yisrael. There's only one way that the Torah talks about killing non-Jews, which is by sayif, by cutting off their head. So, therefore, my comparison is better than yours, and I'm correct. Turn the daf to daf samach zayin amabet, and that's why Rabbi Akiva says that you get skila for michashefa, for a witch, for sorcerers. Says the Gemara on the top of Samach Zayin Amabet. Ben Azai says, I got another source. Ben Azai Omer, well, if you read the Torah today, if anyone paid attention during Torah reading, the next pasuk after Mechashefa Lo Techaya is, I'll read it inside because I have it, Kol Shochevim Behima Mot Yumat, right? Which makes no sense. What connection is there between sorcery and sleeping with an animal? Says Ben Azai, it's to tell you that's the same punishment. So I'll read that inside. The Nazir Omer, Nemar Mechashefa Lo Techaya. But Nemar Kol Shochev, the next pasuk is Kol Shochev and Behima Mot Yumat. Samchu Inyan Lo. The Torah connected. They made them adjacent to each other to tell you Ma Shochev im Behima beskila, which we learned last week. Af michashefa beskila. So that's how you know. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, who's not involved yet, says to Ben Azai, that's a very nice Dvar Torah. You can say it in shul or at your Shabbos table. But just because you have a nice Dvar Torah doesn't mean you should kill somebody. Just because you have a smicha doesn't tell you enough. That's not a powerful enough limud to take someone out and give them skila, right? That's not a source. Ella, says Rabbi Yehuda, I have another source. And my source is Ov and Yidoni, right? Ov and Yidoni, as we discussed earlier this week, are forms of magic, but they should be included under the category of Mechashefa, right? It's one way to do Kishuf, is to do Ov and Yidoni. Remember the bones and the speaking and all the things we talked about. So it's a form of Kishuf. Why does the Torah specifically say, don't go to an Ov and Yidoni? Right? Says the Gemara, says Rabbi Yehuda, Ov and Yidoni b'chla mechashvim ayu. They're included in the sorcerer category. Lama yatsu. The reason the Torah specifically took out and said separately Ov and Yidoni is lakish aleim, is to provide them as a sample, right? A hekesh, a comparison. Lo marlecha, to tell you ma Ov and Yidoni b'skila, just like when you only get skila, which the Torah says by them that you get skila, af mechashef or mechashefa would be b'skila. So that is, the source is that because Ov and Yidoni were really included and they were said separately on their own, it's to tell you that's the paradigm that all sorcerers get skila. Says Gemara, well, that's a great limud, but the problem is that Ov and Yidoni is not one exception. It's two exceptions, one Ov and one Yidoni, right? So if you have one exception, you could say, okay, the Torah said this one thing to tell you about everything else. But remember, there's a principle that once you have two exceptions, then you already say it's clearly to tell you that you don't learn from them, right? So ask the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Nami, why don't you say Lahavi Oven Yidoni Shnei Ktuvim Abayim Ke'achad? There are two psukim to tell you the same rule, basically, that a sorcerer gets skila. And once you have two rules, then we always say Chol Shnei Ktuvim Abayim Ke'achad. Emilamdin. That already means you can't learn from them. So how can Rabbi Yehuda learn from Oven Yidoni? Amar Zechariah Ada Amra. Ada means this is what they say. Ada means like Hada or Zot is the Hebrew. This is what they say. Kasav Rabbi Yehuda Shnei Ktuvim Abayim Ke'achad Melamdin. In fact, Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with that principle. Right? We've had many different principles. It's very common for most Tanaim to say Shnei Ktuvim Abayim Ke'achad, two psukim that tell you the same thing are there to tell you don't learn anything else out from these. Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with that. And he says, even if the Torah says something twice, you can still learn from it. And that's how we learn that a mechashefa or a mechashef get skila. Now, says Rabbi Yochanan, and this is where it gets really a little confusing. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lama nikra shman kshafim. What is the etymology, I think is how we say it, right? What's the etymology of the word kshafim, which means sorcery, right? It says Rabbi Yochanan, it's a combination because shemakchishim pamalya shamala, right? The shin is shemakchishim, pei is pamalya, yud pamalya, I guess is pei yud, shamala, okay, the mem. They contradict the heavenly hosts, I guess is how you could translate pamalya. So what does that mean? So Rashi says something very astounding. Rashi says it means that they, through their magic, God says someone should live, and instead they die. So even though, again, that's what Rashi says, even though this person was decreed upon in heaven to live, they can die because of the kishuf. So kishafim are possible to change God's will, let's say. Okay, now, it doesn't say God's will, it says pamalya shamala. I don't know what that means, right? Are there different levels of execution of God's will that they can contradict, So I don't really know the theological part of it, but that's what Rabbi Yochanan says it means. Says the Gemara now, we're going to question this in a second. Pasuk says, of course, very famous Pasuk, Ein od milvado, right? So Moshe tells Bnei Yisrael, Fa'al Hashem, Ein od milvado. There's no one besides Hashem. Says Rabbi Chanina, what that means is, Afilu dvar kshafim, that even for magic, there's no one besides Hashem. So we think that Rabbi Chanina is arguing with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan makes it sound like there is something besides Hashem. Rabbi Chanina is arguing. Says the Gemara, let's have a story. There was a woman, a sorcerer. She really wanted to curse Rabbi Chanina. And part of the, I don't know much about sorcery, but I know from all the TV shows that I've seen that you have to take some of their hair and their nails and and frogs' legs and things like that But apparently this Gemara believed that you have to have something personal for the person to put in your stew in order to curse them. So she wanted to get some dirt from under the chair or the bed of Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Chanina saw her, hanging around his house, trying to surreptitiously gather some of his DNA, let's say, right? Again, the Gemara does not say DNA; it says dirt, but whatever the concept is. So Amar Allah, so Rabbi Chanina said to her, I don't care, just take it, because imistayat zili avidi, right? If God wants me to die, then your thing's gonna work, and if not, einod mavado ktiv. I'm not worried. There's no power. You have. I'm not worried about what you're going to do to me. I trust in God. Says Gemara, but that sounds great. Aini, but Rabbi Yochanan just said that they can change God's will. Answers the Gemara. Well, even Rabbi Yochanan would admit that Shani Rabbi Chanina to nafesh zechute. Rabbi Chanina had a lot of zechuyot. So Rabbi Chanina had nothing to worry about. Maybe the magicians can change God's will or change the working of God, but not for someone like Rabbi Chanina. And Rabbi Chanina was basically saying, I'm secure enough in my zechuyot with God that I'm not worried about what you're going to do. Again, I don't really know what that means. They can change God's will if someone's maybe on the cusp, so maybe they're not really changing God's will. Rabbi Chanina was comfortable himself. Of course, this goes against many Gemarot that you should never be comfortable in yourself, right? Who's Rabbi Chanina to say that I'm comfortable? But anyways, that is what the Gemara says so far. Amar Rabbi Eva bar Nagri, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Says Rabbi Eva bar Nagri, says Rabbi Chia bar Abba, now that we've just had the Parshiot, I guess they didn't in the Gemara's time, we just had the Parshiot of the magicians with Paro, right? So all the Chartumim of Paro, when Moshe and Aaron came and did different miracles, some of them they were able to recreate, right? It says Vayasu Kain Chartumim came belatehem or belahatehem. So there's two different words that we use. So sometimes it says belatehem. They did it with latehem, which we'll see without a hey. And sometimes it says bilahatehem, right? With lahatehem. So what's the difference between those two? So it says, who do we have? It says Rabbi Eva bar Nagri, Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, the difference between magicians using latehem and lahatehem is that latehem is maseh shedim. Latehem is where you do magic, but you rely on shedim, which is a lower level of magic, meaning you recreate, like it says it by the blood, right? They use latehem, right? So they were able to turn things into blood, but they used the shedim, these whatever shedim are, to help them. The lahatehem implies that they used masik shafim, that they really created things through sorcery, meaning they had no extra help in doing it. V'cheinu Omer, and similar to this is the pasuk in Gan Eden, which says that when Hashem kicked out Adam, he set up eight lahat hacherev hamitapechet. I don't know how you translate that, but lahat usually here means a flame of a sword that turns every way. But there it means basically something that acts on its own. So there, the word lahat or lahatehem is something that's independently active, as opposed to latehem, which is they used to use kshafim. They used to use shedim to help them out. Amar Abaya. Now it says Abaya, you know how you can tell whether a magician or a sorcerer is using shedim or not? The kapir amana, if they're very makbid, they're very particular about using a certain object to do their magic, that means that they are really not that powerful and they need a shade to help them, right? So maybe the shade only speaks when you have a certain, I don't know, hat turning into a dove, right? But the low kapir amana, if they don't care, they go to the audience and say, anyone's got a hat, come bring it to me. I could turn it into, something magical. Then they're doing it on their own. Then they're kshafim. Again, I don't really know what that means in any of this, but that is what Abaya says. It says Abaya now. We are at the 8th, I think, wide line, first word on the line. Amar Abaya, Hilchot Shafim, the rules of how you punish people who do magic are very similar to Hilchot Shabbat in many ways. Hilchot Shabbat. Yesh mehem beskila. Sometimes you actually you stone the person, like Shabbat. Yesh mehem patur avol asor. Some things you're patur for skila, but you're not supposed to do it. The yesh mehem mutar lechatchila. And there are some things where you can do it no problem. What are the categories? Ha'osem ma'aseh, someone who does an act. They do a physical act in order to make the magic happen. I keep saying magic, but sorcery happen. They get skila. That's our Mishnah. They get killed with stoning. Ha'ochez et ha'inayim, if you're just sort of tricking the eyes, right? So you're saying, I'm going to create a flower, but you're just doing it by sleight of hands, then you're patur. You don't get skila, aval asur, but you're not allowed to do that, which of course is where everybody starts asking how you can do magic shows and things like that, right? Because this implies if I say I'm going to pull a rabbit out of my hat, right, then that is patur because I'm not really creating a rabbit, but it should be usur according to this. So there's opinions. I think they quote a name of Moshe. I don't really know the halacha that that it's not really a big problem because nobody really thinks that they're creating a rabbit. It's not like you're convincing people I'm creating a rabbit, but the question is, are you doing it for real or doing it on through sleight of hands? Everybody who goes to a magic show knows that that person did not create a rabbit from nothing. So it's basically, that going in there, maybe the kids don't know, but the adults know. But either way, there is a whole debate about, what kind of tricks are okay and what kind of tricks are not okay. But either way, that's our Gemara. And the third category is what's mutar lechatchila. That's like the story we had, not yesterday, I guess 2 days ago, was Kid Rabbi Chanina Rav Oshaya. Remember, we had the story of Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Oshaya. They were very hungry on Erev Shabbos, right? And Kol Ma'alei Shabbata, every Friday afternoon, Havi Aski b'Hilchot Yitzira, they would study the Hilchot Yitzira. The Girsa before was the Sefer Yitzira, right? They would look into this book, Mevri Lahu, and they would create for themselves Igla Tilta V'Achlile. They would create a calf and they would eat it for Shabbos. So that is the case where it's mutar. Now, why in the world is that mutar? That sounds like real sorcery, right? You're creating a new thing. So Rashi here says, I'll read it outside. Rashi says it's not considered kishuf, the ma'aseh hakadosh baruch hu hein, because it's an action of God. Because al yedei shem kedusha shelo hu, they made it through the names of God. So again, I don't know if any idea what that means, but Rashi is explaining that since they did sorcery, basically, but the words they used, the names they used were names of God, which is what we talked about with Sefer Yetzirah before, that's okay, because they're not relying on another power, right? The problem with Kishuf, according to the way Rabbi Yochanan said it before, is that you're acting against God in some way. You're acting against what God wants, but if you use the names of God, then it's okay. And again, what that really means, I have no idea, but that is what Abaya says.
So then it was mutar for the Maral Miprag to create the golem then.
So you can use the same logic to say that if the Maral Miprag used the names of Hashem and the Sefer Yetzirah, then it would be okay. Again, like I said, with the introduction that none of
Is
this.
that the way we paskin regarding the Maral Miprag?
I don't know, but we do seem to quote this Gemara pretty affirmatively. So for whatever reason, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Shai could do it. Presumably, he could do it for the same reason. But I can't answer really about psak. That's a lot of detail.
Are there magic words to create eggs? They're very expensive right now.
Amar Ravashi. Says Ravashi. I've seen some really good magicians in my day. Chazina Leila Avua de Karna. I saw this famous magician, Avua de Karna, which literally means the father of Karna, but I'm not sure if that was a stage name or a real name. And he was Nafitz Vishadi Kricha de Shirai Minichirei. He sneezed and he pulled, how they pull out of their mouth, like 10 feet of silk things. He pulled, whatever, he doesn't say how long, but he sneezed and he sneezed up a whole colored roll of silk, not colored, a roll of silk from his nose, from his nostrils. So again, that's a pretty common trick nowadays, pulling something out of your mouth. I guess he did it out of his nose. It was a good version. Continues the Gemara back to Mitzrayim, right? Now, finally, after the first two makot and the miracles before the makkah, the third makkah was kinam, was lice. And after kinam, the Chartumim came to Paro and they said, we can't do this. Etzba Elohim, this is the finger of God, right? So says the Gemara, why? Why all of a sudden they can make dam, they can make tzfardea? Why can't they do kinim? So Amar Rabbi Eliezer, this tells us, Mikan, she'ein hashade yochol livrot bria pachot mikisara, birya pachot mikisara. That now you see that a shade, and we're assuming that the magicians were not very capable, but they would rely on shadim. A shade cannot create a new creature that's less than the size of a barley, right? Barleys are very small, that I know. Put them in cholent, right? So a lice is even smaller than that. And there's a limit. The shadim are very good. They have a factory in the back, right, where they can make rabbits and doves and things like that. But they can't make things that are so good, like microchips or lice, for that matter. So that's what you see, says Rav Eliezer. Says Rav Papa, that's ridiculous. Rav Papa Amar HaElohim, by God, they don't make anything. Afilu Kigamla Namilo Matzibari. They can't even make, they can't make a camel, which is the biggest thing, right? They knew. They can't make an elephant, assuming something bigger is easier to make. Hi, Michnifle. But these things, meaning larger animals, they can be, Michnif is the word we used before. They can be sort of moved over. You can trick them, right? By maybe using sound or using food or a trail to get them to come. But but these tiny little things like lice right? Lice, you can't trick them in that way. You can't. Michnif literally doesn't mean trick. It means gather, right? To bring things together, meaning you can't get them to come on your command. So I guess you can train a snake or I don't know, or a camel or to come on your command and to hide and to come out at the right time, but you can't train lice to do that, and that's why they couldn't do this miracle. Now, Amalei Rav Rabbi Chia, speaking about magic, said Rav told Rabbi Chia, I saw some great magic in my day. I once saw a Taya as like a nomad, like an Arab, a traveler, some guy in the desert. The Shakle Safsira, he took his sword, the Gadje Legamle, and he cut his camel in half, right? The Tarafle Betabla, then he beat on a drum, beat on like a thing, about like a surface. The camel came back to life. So I saw him kill his camel with the sword, and then 10 minutes later, he brought it back to life. Amar Le Rabbi Chia said to Rav, that's obviously not a real creation, because Lebatar Hachi, after he brought it back to life, Damu Partamiavi, did you see any blood and guts and everything sitting on the ground like that would happen when you killed an animal and sliced the animal open? Ella, clearly he didn't slice it open. He was just deceiving you. He was distracting your eyes somehow, making it look like he killed the camel. Nothing like that happened. It wasn't real magic. He didn't actually bring a camel back to life. Now, one more story. Funny story. Zeiri, which is, I guess 10 or so lines, 12 lines from the bottom. Zeiri once came, Ikla Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim. He showed up once in Egypt, in Alexandria. And a big city, he went to the store, he went to the market. Zavin Chamra, he bought a donkey. This is one of the craziest stories. He bought a donkey. Okay, now he goes home with his donkey. He's traveling home. Half hour in, he gets to the first rest stop, and he fills his donkey up with, like I said, I was teaching this today. He didn't check it with the mechanic before he went home. So he took his donkey. He went to drink. The donkey had to drink some water. He came to feed it some water, fill up the tank of gas, as we would put it. Pashar, the donkey basically disappeared. He's faded. The kam gamla to uskanita. It turned into a gamla. Gamla here means not a camel, but a piece of wood, a plank of an uskanita, of a uskanita bridge, right? It turns basically into some large plank that basically the guy had given him a piece of wood that he had dressed up to be a camel with, I don't know, somehow, some magic. And as soon as it gets wet, the whole thing disappears and you got a camel. I bought cars like this before, right? You get home and and you got, basically it all falls apart. It's a piece of wood. So Amrule, so he went back to return it, right? Get his money back. And they said to him in the camel store, I guess, they said to him, Elav Zeiriyat, if you weren't Zeiri and you're going to make a big stink about this and you're famous and, you're going to leave a really bad review on Yelp and things like that, then I wouldn't give you your money back. I wouldn't give you your money back because everybody knows that if you read the fine print on the donkey receipt, it says no returns, right? Does anybody buy something here in this marketplace below Badagle Amaya and doesn't check it by pouring water on it? Half the things in the marketplace are, made out of magic, and you get them wet and they're going to disappear. So you should have known that this is a sorcery-filled marketplace, and that your donkey, might not stand up to the water test, and therefore it's your buyer beware. Okay. Anyways, we got one more story. Sorry, I thought that was the last one. One more at the 2 dots. Yanai, a guy named Yanai, and this is the really crazy story. So a guy named Yanai, again, I don't know who he was. Ikla lahu shpiza. He once showed up at a certain bed and breakfast, right? A shpiza is like an inn. Amar lahu. So he said to the people there, Ashkunya Maya, can I get some water to drink? I need a drink. So krivu shatita. They didn't bring him a glass of water. They brought him this thing called shatita. If you recall, we had shatita in brachot because we had a lot of questions about what bracha to make. Shatita is a mixture of like grain soaked in water, like oats, basically. It's mostly water though, but it has some shatita is the flour basically put inside of it. So they brought him this smoothie, we'll call it nowadays, and he saw that when they brought him the drink, chaza de kamerachshin sifata, that the innkeeper, the woman, the waitress, was bringing him a drink, and she was mumbling under her breath. She was moving her lips. So he figured, oh boy, that she's saying some magic trick on this. And next thing you know, I'm going to be passed out and they're going to steal my wallet, right? So shada portamine. So he poured out a little bit of it on the ground. You know, the other trick you got to know, right? If they're not watching, you're not sure what they gave you, you pour a little on the ground. And of course, habi akrabi turned into scorpions. However that happened, or it was scorpions. So he realized not a good idea. He didn't drink it. So Amarlo, so then he said to the innkeeper, or the woman maybe, Anna shatai miditcho. You know, I drink what you gave me. I got something for you to drink. Atonami shatimi didi. You should drink my thing. And of course, he kept in reserve in the back of his knapsack his own potion that anyone who drank it turned into a donkey. Right? Good thing to have around. So Ashkaya, so she drank his thing. Habichamra, she turned into a donkey. So what did Yanai do? He got on the donkey and rode out of the inn. Okay, so Rachva, he got on her and he rode Salak Lashuka, and he got out to the marketplace. So he's riding on his donkey out in the marketplace. Now, of course, she had a spotter, someone who saw what happened. Ata Chaverta, so her friends came and Pisharale, and they reversed the magic, which I think happened in Harry Potter, right? They were able to undo the magic, and Chazia derachiv v'kaya itzada b'shuka. And it turned out that when they undid the magic, instead of him riding a donkey, he was riding on the back of a woman in the middle of the marketplace. So that's the end of the story. I have no idea what you can glean from that story. I'm sure the Marsha has something to tell us, but that is the story of magic. So
Is it the same donkey from the previous story?
It could be, but I agree with James's point that this is really a good reason not to drink oat milk, because very, very suspect. Okay. Says the Gemara now, 5 lines in the bottom, just one more Dvar Torah for Pesach, for your Seder. It says in the Pasuk, the second Makkah now, Talat Tzifardea, the frog came up, but Techas et Eretz Mitzrayim, and it covered the land of Egypt. Now, how does one frog, Tzifardea is a singular, right? I'm sure everyone has asked this at their Seder, I assume so. How does one frog cover the whole Egypt? So Amar Reb Elazar, well, it was one frog, but it had a lot of baby frogs, right? Tzfardea achad haita, and his shritza malak kol eretz Mitzrayim. One frog came out of the Nile, spawned millions and millions of more frogs that grew up and covered Egypt. But it says, in fact, it's a tnai, it's a machloket tanaim. Because Rabbi Akiva says, 3 lines from the bottom, that in fact, tzfardea achat haita. But the truth is, it was one frog. Moshe or Aaron hit the water. One frog came out. Umalek kol eretz Mitzrayim. It was a big enough frog that it filled the whole Egypt. It was the biggest frog you can imagine. Amar lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to him, Akiva, your imagination is not right for Agadata. Ma'alecha etzel Haggadah. What business do you have? Why are you telling us things, your ideas about Haggadah? You take everything very literally, right? But Haggadah is not meant to be very literally. Kalemi dibrotecha. It's a little bit rough, right? Stop your words, meaning take your ideas. V'lech etzel nigaim v'ohalot. Then go study nigaim and ohalot. These are very technical, literal, detailed things. That's where it makes sense to take things literally. That's clearly not what the Torah means. It wasn't one frog. Ella, what I explain it says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Tzfardea achat haita. It was one frog that came out of Mitzrayim, but this was a very influential frog. He had millions and millions of followers on Twitter, right? And Sharka Lahem, he croaked for them the himbo, and all the frogs in the world came to Mitzrayim. So it was one ringleader frog who then croaked and brought together all the frogs from the world. But so it's true, yeah, literally there was one frog, but clearly you, Rabbi Akiva, are wrong. There's no way that it was one frog in the whole Egypt. Okay, that is the end of today's daf. Tomorrow, God willing, we will continue at Rabbi Akiva back to our Mishnah, and we are going to learn tomorrow. I'm only unfortunately available in the morning, so 7:45 a.m. Sorry for the late notice, Miriam.
No worries. So do we deduce from this that we actually believe that magic exists?
So I tried to.
Of course.
the Gemara makes it sound very literal, right? Like not only that it exists, but that it can contradict God in some way, right? Which doesn't, I don't know. That doesn't go with the theology that I am very familiar with, right? So, and clearly there are opinions in the Gemara who disagree, right? There's opinions, Rabbi Eliezer, I think it was, who said, they can't do anything, but
Rabbi Akiva.
Rabbi Kiva. Okay, so but there seem to be a lot of opinions here that give a lot of credence to this magic and or Shadim, but Shadim is the same question, right? What are Shadim creating something? Like what's going on? I don't have but the Gemara does seem to take it very literally.
Well, what is the gematria? That they're missing a few words. Mechashef, machshikim palmaya. There's what's the shin and the chaf, and I mean they're missing a few letters there, right? Mechashef and mechashim palmaya shalmala. They're missing a few letters.
No, it's not. So it's not literally. It's very often we do it. It doesn't mean that every letter, right? You got to make these sort of catchy titles, right? It means that it's sort of you can expand it. The word michashefa to expand it. Sorry, kshafim shemakchishim with the shin basically pamaya shamala. It's really relying on the shin pei and the mem. Makchishim pamaya shamala. I don't know. I mean, I don't. Again, I don't know. I don't really.
Well, the mem in the beginning, mechashef, machshikim, machish, machish palmaya. That's the mem in the beginning.
Right.
And then the last mem is
No, I
shamala.
used, well, you're saying, because you're using the word mechashefa. I use it from the word kshafim, but again, it's the same limud.
No, mechashef doesn't have to be mechashefa. It can be mechashef.
Right. So the way Rashi says it is that it's kachash pamal yeshamala. They weaken.
Rashi says achash.
Kachash.
I saw that Rashi.
Yeah.
Chashash, chichesh, chichash.
Yeah, they weaken. But that's where he says that on someone who Hashem said should live is going to die. So again, I don't no idea what that means. Tomorrow morning, 7:45. And then God willing, I'm traveling next Shabbat. But the good news is I'm traveling on the East Coast, so I'll be able to learn, God willing, Motzaei Shabbat. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shabbat tov.
See as many of you as we can tomorrow morning without oat milk.
Unless you're having a meat breakfast.
I don't want to turn into a donkey or scorpions or any of that. Okay, good night, everyone.
Night.
Okay.
Mhm.